Grandpa Ellis's name was Henry. He married Anna Maria Smith Robertson, and her father was Thomas Robertson, an Anglican minister down in Musquash, and he had 9 children.
She was the founder of the church.
He was the first minister.
He arranged how it built.
Right.
But he died at the age of 39, really, very young, and left her with these children, and she moved up to St. John. His salary had been, I think, something like $250 a year. And so she moved up to St. John.
The local people gathered up $600, isn't that the story?
Something like that.
To move her up and get her established in the city.
And she did what a lot of widows in those days did. She ran a boarding house for gentlemen only. Her son, her oldest son at the time, they had another son who had gone to sea and they never heard from him again. Her oldest son, Thomas Robertson, went out to work at the age of 13.
You're not thinking of James F.
Pardon?
James F. Robertson?
James F. James,
so that was the oldest son, or the second?
Well, he was the oldest that was left. I think there was one older.
Of 9 children?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was working in some drapery
dry goods
factory or something with 2 other young men by the name of, one was named Manchester and the other was named Allison. And as they got older, I don't know how old they were, but the 3 of them got together and started a department store called Manchester Robertson Allison, MRA, known locally as MRAs.
And this was in St. John?
In St. John.
Around 18...
Before the big fire.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1850s, 1860s?
Probably.
And luckily, their establishment was spared in the Great Fire.
Yeah.
It was outside of the zone, because
Yeah,
2/3 of the
the
city
zone.
was burnt.
It was
so
right,
it must have.
it was on King
So,
Street.
as it turned out, the survivors in the city needed everything, from blankets to dishes to boots and shoes and bedding and everything. And they were there to sell it.
And James F., being a son of an Anglican minister, was a devout Anglican, and went to a stone church in St. John. In fact, he had a house just across the street.
James F. in later life saying that leaving school at age 12 to go into business was the worst mistake he ever made in his life. Should have left when he was 10.
Yes.
Because he had no idea there was so much money to be made out there.
So, James F. and the other children, they would have grown up with the mother in St. John at the boarding house?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the girls married.
Yeah.
She was
Dad's father came over, I guess, from Digby and married one of these,
And
one of the girls, Anna Maria, whatever. So old James F. Robertson was always referred to as Uncle James. And he would be my great uncle.
He wanted to build a summer house.
Called Carsley.
So he bought the property.
K-A-R-S-A-L-I-E. Carsley.
Carsley.
I don't know whether it was Carsley, I think. But anyway, he bought this property and he built the house, which is now Shadow Lawn.
And then he wanted to, because he'd grown up poor, he wanted to establish a boarding school for young boys,
Especially sons.
at which ministers' sons could attend at half price, Anglican. So he bought 2 houses up where Rossi School is now, North House and the South House. And then they built a school building. set back about midway between the two, and that was called Rossi Collegiate School, or they used to call it the college. And I remember I mentioned that I was going to the college one time to Mrs. Ovington, and she kind of smiled at old Vin as much as say, how could this 12-year-old kid be going to college?
Yeah, he was a salesman for a paint company, and he used to travel.
Who, Tom?
No, not Tom. Henry.
Oh.
Dad's father.
Oh, his father. Yeah.
He traveled around, and he had a reputation as a storyteller. Yeah. And he would be staying at different hotels, and as he went around the Maritimes selling paint, and he would entertain people with telling stories.
One of his stories was he used to travel by train down the Annapolis Valley, and he'd stop off and go around to the merchants trying to make sales for his product, and then he'd catch a train back to Digby. And there was one weekend when he missed connections. He was out selling too hard, and he couldn't catch the last train home, so he had to stay in a little hotel in some little town. And there was a young salesman who had not been long on the road, and he was marooned in the little hotel too, and they were sitting together at a table, and this young fellow was bitching about only one kind of soup and choice of 2 kinds of meat and 3 vegetables and just rice pudding for dessert. And my grandfather said, well, you should have been where I was last weekend. We didn't have any soup. We just had fish and potatoes. And no desserts, or just some leftover cake. This fellow said, my God, what a dump. Where was that? He said, home. I was home.
I think it must have been your grandfather, and you took him flying, and he had a big white mustache.
Oh, yeah, well,
now, who is that?
My mother's father.
Mother's side of the family.
The Montreal.
Okay.
Charles Scarf.
Yeah.
Grandpa Scarf.
Get a picture of this one.
He married one of the Atwaters.
Yeah.
Okay.
He came from England. He came from England.
He was a druggist.
Yeah.
He lived on Arlington Avenue, 35, why would I remember? 35 Arlington Avenue.
Yeah.
In Westmount.
Westmount, just up the street from where your mother is.
My grandmother.
Grandmother. He
Druggist
came over
to
on a
Montreal.
sailing vessel, I remember.
I think he studied pharmacy after he came to Canada.
When he first came over, he went up, he lived in Ontario for a while.
Yeah.
I can't remember just where. And then he removed to Montreal, and at one time he had 2 or 3 drugstores until he found the Frenchmen were stealing them blind in 2 of them. So he let them go, closed them out, and he just kept his own. Grandpa Scarf, although he sold all kinds of things like toothpaste and so on, he never used toothpaste himself. He used baking soda and table salt in a saucer. He would dampen the toothbrush and put it down into this stuff and scour his teeth.
Wow.
And he still had his natural teeth when he was into his, what, 90s?
Or
or
he lived to be 99.
He lived to be 99.
Wow.
But he still had his natural teeth.
Charles Edmund.
Charles Edmund.
Edmund Scarf. C.E. Scarf.
And now he married Miss
He
what was
married
the Atwater?
Hattie Atwater.
Hattie Atwater.